Alright, hello everyone. Here we're back for a Golf Clash tutorial video. And let's start to talk about this hole. This is Paris course, hole number 2. And this is actually going to be in Tour 11 from the 3rd tee box right here. So the extra length makes this one just a tiny bit harder. It kind of splits your club a little bit. So what you'll usually see is you'll see a max line somewhere right about here, which brings a problem because, well, it might be a little bit, could be just a little bit north of that, depending on your power ball that you use. But what that does is it makes headwinds, it kind of splits them because you'll only be able to do a wood shot with certain winds that are probably 8 o'clock is probably the most that you can, if it's pointed at 8 o'clock or 4 o'clock, for instance. So if I was to set up a wind diagram here, let's take a look here. So a few of these winds are going to be off limits. So let's use red. You've probably got a line between here and here where the shots are going to change. You won't be able to go beyond, and these shots in themselves are still going to be very, very challenging, even if you do get these exact winds, because you're going to be kind of pushing yourself towards the max line to where you don't need to overpower, and it's going to be hard to miss the bunker with going into that much, like going right to the, potentially to the power line, depending on, you might go a ring or two, you might need to go a ring or two into power. It just depends on how big the wind is. You really don't know what you're going to get. But basically, these winds down here are going to make things very difficult on you. So let's talk a little bit about the clubs real quick. So my first club of choice will be Thor's Hammer, 6 and 7, to make sure that you have that for driver wise, because we're going to have to hit a driver down on these shots, and a Parc 6 or 7 is going to fall right below. And we can throw in extra mile, assuming 7 or 8 at this point, more than likely. And what's nice about these is they'll have a little bit more curl. It's going to be a very, very hard shot for this, but it's still possible. It's workable. And sometimes, to be honest with you, this headwind case, you don't even need to hit the green. If you get on the green, there's a good chance you're going to win the shootout. So let's also talk about the woods here. So more times than not, you'll have a wood. So wood will be pretty much, your go-to shot. So in terms of a sniper, you're going to need at least an 8. And if you don't have a sniper 8 yet, you're going to be better off with Guardian. And even a low Guardian will be okay. I would say power-wise, I think you're going to be looking at wanting, probably around a 5. Guardian 5 or higher for this hole. And it just has to do about, raising your power line to about, this point where the sniper is, more so than anything. Those early snipers are just going to lower that line, push that line down, even with power balls. So since this is a shootout, you don't have the choice to choose the power ball as you get to the tee box. It'll most likely come from the hole before. So aside from that, I can't really think about, what else you'd be using, maybe Cat 6 or higher, but it's going to be lower priority than both of those. So, these clubs are listed in order of priority. And then, I can probably throw Hammerhead in there as well, especially later in the game. And it'll actually be, a higher priority than that Cat because of accuracy. Plus it has a little bit more length on the sniper, plus very similar precision. But level 6 is where the backspin gets up high enough to where you can actually use it. So let's talk a little bit about the spin. So we'll talk about the sniper shot, and what I'll usually use for the side spin shot, right in here, maybe 5.5 to 6, somewhere in there. So 5.5-ish, and then maybe 6, and definitely 6.5 at this top case, but sometimes I'll even use 6.5 on these side winds. It just really depends on how high it gets up. And, right around, we could still have this potential wind where we could use, so maybe 5.25 here for this slight case. But on winds that are, say 730, you're going to have to switch to a driver shot, and it usually changes the way that you want to do it. And what I'll do in terms of priority here with the Thor's hammer, in the case that I get one of those, I'll usually use max pretty much exclusively, no matter what. On this is I'll use max, whether it's a Parc, whether it's Thor, whether it's Guardian, and I'll just switch my landing zone. So let's talk briefly about that. This fairway is relatively divided, so there's a line here I'm going to draw in. And if you land on the one half, then it bounces to the right. If you land on the left half, then it bounces to the left. So you need to kind of stay on the left half of this fairway, which really makes it tough because you're usually within a ring or so that you got to land from this edge, which makes this shot really hard. But what you'll see me do is, let's say, hypothetically, we have to do an extra mile, and we'll have to land down here. So here's kind of the extra mile land zone, and you'll still use the max and just try to kind of trickle it along up like that. And let's say that a Parc, you'll be able to have a little bit more backspin, so you'll be able to land here and do kind of one of these, a little bit faster bumps. And Thor's hammer is pretty much the best of the bunch, and being able to play it kind of up here and really be able to backspin it. All of these shots are probably going to require some curl, more than likely, but you'll want to play your wind effect more than anything. The wind's probably going to be so high that with winds like this, for example, you might need very, very little curl to 0. So you might not need to do very much at all in those cases. But I'm thinking, somewhere maybe right around here, if that tee box was your ball, like if this was your, shot circle, and you might, just gracefully pull it over if the wind's like this. But if the wind's like this, depending on how large it is, you could potentially go almost as far as max with your curl for that shot. But let's talk a little bit about this one, because this one's quite easier. So this wood shot is what you're going to primarily be hitting. And I'll usually aim right about 2 rings from this edge for a sniper. That'll give me more than enough room, 3 rings of air, because I'll have 2 rings on the right plus the bullseye. And what I'll usually try to do is enough side spin to land right here, just on this front, and then just a little bit of run out is the way that I'll set up my guide. However, the hardest thing about this is also, wind effect. So in the case that we have this wind that's pointed towards the left, that bounce is going to want to land in this sand right here. A lot of guys will miss to this left. They'll either under adjust the rings or they won't accommodate enough for wind effect. So you'll need some kind of offset curl to kind of counter that. And if the wind's small, you'll be able to get away with, in this wind situation, you might want to go maybe right around here. Just depends on how. So, pulling over maybe a quarter of the way to a third of the phone curl that you can use. But if the wind's really small, you might not need to use that much. You'll have to scale it either way, but I'm just trying to give you, a general idea. Whereas this, if you have this wind, it might kind of do the opposite, where you'll see the ball guide. You'll have to use your ball guide and just, kind of judge the way that it's going to be deflected, because there's, quite the possibility that you'll have to anti-curl this. You'll have to counter curl here to kind of straighten out the wind effect for this shot. But let's talk a little bit about the adjustment here. So, side wind, headwind, tailwind. So with the side wind case, what I'll usually do for this this shot right here, I'll go max plus 20 to 25%. So if a sniper, it doesn't matter what the club is, but I use more times than not the sniper for this tour, 25%, and a wind that you'll usually see is about 12 miles per hour, give or take. And, the guys who make mistakes, they're going, 12, 13, 14 rings. You need to go full 15, 15.3 here. Without doing this, and as I mentioned, as you have to pull, down this way, for instance, guys who are only going 13 rings or whatever, they're going to land, they're going to hit this spot, and it's going to be kind of shifted. It's going to kind of land over here, and then they're not going to be able to recover that bounce. So keep in mind that as let's say you're using a cataclysm, you're going to have about half the accuracy as sniper. So if I'm, 2-3 rings, but, somewhere between 2 and 3 rings left of this rough edge, you're only going to be, right about a ring for the cataclysm. So perfect ball is going to kind of come into effect much more importantly. But that's what I'll use for the side wind. Very similar for the tailwind case. So with the tailwind case, maybe I'll actually, probably actually do minus 25%. And you'll definitely want to, in that tailwind case, make sure that you do the extra backspin. And land zone is going to be very critical. Landing right on this right on this edge, as opposed to, 3 yards back, makes all the difference. Land zone is super critical. A 3-yard different land zone, for instance, could be the difference between you stopping by the hole and potentially, there's kind of a false back. So at 6 yards, it actually falls off into the bunker and you're actually like 9 or 10. So that's what you're looking at there. Oh, that was supposed to be for the tailwind case though. So tailwind case down here, max plus 25%. percent. With the headwind case, we pretty much won't be doing that, but let's say, you know, hypothetically, you're trying to do this one, this little line right here, which is this case, then at least max plus 30 minimum, maybe even 35%. So you'll definitely have to, you know, crank it up just a tiny bit extra because you're going to have that extra wind effect in play there. So let's talk a little bit about the other side. So the headwind's going to have quite a few more cases because you'll see that we'll have these 3 drivers. Now, the way that I play them is going to be, you know, relatively, you know, you're going to have to kind of free air it. As you can see, you know, max line being up here. You can see that all of these targets for you to land are short of that. So you pretty much have to assume, okay, well, I've already gone 5 rings. Well, the good thing is, you know, the driver, it has very large circles there. So you can kind of estimate it relatively well. As I mentioned, you'll probably need curl with all these shots over here. And, you know, you can pretty much assume that, you know, especially with your big rings, that you'll be able to see at least where 5 rings kind of falls, 6 rings falls. And you'll just kind of have to set up accordingly to that. And what I'll usually do is very close to, you know, kind of close to max, more or less. And part of the reason for that is you'll see that the target, more so than not, you won't have to short hit these. You'll see that you'll be set up at essentially, you know, min club, but you might have to actually add on from that min club adjustment. So, you know, playing very close to max is going to be kind of in the ballpark because you're going to have so much extra wind resistance with this being kind of coming down over this water. And so you'll need to add on to this. And it's very close to playing max. Now, it might play only like mid if the wind is very small. But otherwise, you know, playing max pretty much spot on is going to be. Now, the only one that's going to kind of change a little bit is this one right here, this Thor's hammer shot. As you can see that it kind of comes up to the line. So max won't be enough. So you might want to use like max plus 10, 15, something like that. So you'll want to do even more up at this other land zone. And, you know, quite a bit of curl. The more curl you'll need is kind of the higher you land. So this Thor's hammer is probably going to need almost maxed out no matter what the wind is, more or less. It's going to be very close. It'll be hard to miss this one left. The only exception might be if they actually give you, you know, this wind over here, the most left pointed one. That's probably the only one that you can get left of the hole. So, you know, good luck with this hole. It's a little bit challenging, but wanted to make sure that I covered all cases for you. See you guys on the next one.